welcome to Learn Plus. My name is Brenda Bailey-Hughes. I'll be your facilitator today. Learn Plus is a webinar where each month we learn on this LinkedIn Live one specific workplace related skill that I think will be incredibly helpful to you. And the plus of our learning is that we also try to focus on one way to train others on that skill. For those learning and development professionals online with us, for our team leaders and anyone else who wants to infuse this month more positivity into the workplace, not just for themselves, but for their teams and colleagues as well. So glad that you're here. In the comments section, why don't you let me know where you're coming in from? It'd be great to see who all is with us today and where you're live streaming from. I'm in Southern Indiana, about an hour south of Indianapolis, in my home studio, and I am excited to welcome our guest today in just a few minutes. His name is Scott Mautz, and Scott, I think, is in California. That's where he usually is, but who knows where his travel schedule may have taken him. Let me tell you a little bit about Scott and about today's feature, and then we'll get rolling with him. So I met Scott teaching a variety of executive education programs through the Kelley School of Business where I teach. He and I were both working with a number of corporate groups, and he's so delightful. I can't wait to be training with him live face-to-face again soon. Scott, before that, served as a senior executive with Procter & Gamble. He was a top desk columnist for Inc. magazine. And in fact, I think while he was at Inc., he was named one of the top 50 leadership innovators. So very cool leadership strategy and innovation. He's written several award-winning books. One, his most recent, Leading from the Middle, is the #1 bestseller in Amazon for a bit. I was going to show you all my copy of Leading from the Middle, but as I was finishing it up, and I had all the margins scribbled in and highlights all over it, and a friend of mine was visiting and saw it and said, "Wait a minute, I'm leading from the middle. That's what I'm doing, and that's why I'm like pulling my hair out because I can't manage this very well." And so she said, "I need the book." I said, "Buy the book." And she said, "No, I need it now." So she took my copy. And when I knew we were having Scott on as a guest, I said, okay, let's figure out why we can't, just get this back to me. And she said, I've already passed it along to someone else. So my copy of Leading in the Middle is floating around corporations all over the Midwest and will make its way back to me, or I think I'm going to break down and just get my own second copy and keep sharing. So anyway, that's so one of the things I do want you to know about Scott, and it looks like maybe we're having troubles with comments coming in. Hopefully we are still streaming, but we are not seeing your comments yet. So be patient with us. And hopefully we'll figure out how to get your comments live so we can see what questions that you have. In the meantime, we do have a poll that we'll put up, and hopefully you can scan the code. There you go, the QR code, and at least get us some sense of how you're feeling about your levels of positivity even before we get our comments up and working. So do you think on a typical day, a typical work day, would you rate yourself as very positive, somewhat positive? Do you lean more toward negative, or are you very negative and that's why you decided to join me and Scott today? Take a minute and fill that out. If you can't use the QR code with scanning it with your phone, you can just go to slido.com and join with the number that you see on the poll on the screen. So that will be fun. Here we go. They're coming in. We got some positive folks, some somewhat positive folks. We'll keep that live for a while as some other folks join us. Hopefully you all can see each other's comments and you know where you're coming in from. But if not, we're going to keep working on that. And they're working with LinkedIn to see what we can do to get your comments here for us. So that's great. Well, okay, so right now we have a pretty even split on those who are very positive, somewhat positive, leaning more towards positive, and very negative. That's why you're here. We'll keep that live as all of you scan in for a little bit more. So as we think about being positive, I wrote a course in the LinkedIn Learning Library about being positive. The way I set the course up was 21 specific strategies, things that maybe take you 1 minute a day to do. And the thinking being that we've heard that adage that in 21 days you build a habit. And I don't know how much science is behind that, but it certainly gets us some momentum in 21 days. We get moving in the right direction. So in 21 days, if you experiment with each one of those strategies, by the end of the 21 strategy attempts, then you will have kind of created a habit of bringing some kind of positivity into the workplace with you every single day. You'll also have tasted a whole flavor of different types of courses, different types of positivity strategies. And that way you can pick and choose those that really worked for you. Some won't be your cup of tea, and that's fine. Don't worry about those. Pick the ones that work and hold on to those beyond. Scott also has a course in the LinkedIn Learning Library about positivity. And when I saw that and knew Scott, I said, oh, we've got to have a conversation about this. Scott's course is specifically about staying positive in the face of negativity. So for those of you who said I lean more towards the negative, I'm very negative, that's you are in the right spot today. For those of us who have more natural inclinations towards positivity, this will be a great refresher on what we need to do to make sure that we are bringing positivity into the workplace every day. All right, so I know we don't have comments yet, but that's okay. We're going to keep working on that. In the meantime, I want to bring Scott in for all of you to meet. My friend and colleague, Scott Mautz. Welcome, Scott. Hello.
Hello, everybody. I know the comments will come in. I know you're out there. I saw a nice balance of positivity minded or not so much. So I think we're going to help a lot of people today, Brenda.
I do too. Oh, and look, there's the book that I lost my copy of. I've shared my copy. So there, now everybody gets to see it, because I was like, mine is in Annie's hand. No, Annie's passed it on. It's in somebody else. I don't know where it is, but it's getting good. It's getting good use, and that's
it's the same copy, Brenda. It made its way to me in San Diego.
That is it.
It's just
You've
there's
got
one
my
copy
notes in the margins.
My publisher printed one copy. It's just been going around the globe.
So. It is going to be the most well annotated version of a book ever.
That's right.
Oh, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. It could be more energized about a topic than this one. So I'm
great. I love this topic. Yeah, I'm not supposed to have favorite courses in the library, but I kind of think being positive is one of my favorite courses in there. I'm curious. I know I wrote mine. I authored it when I realized I do a lot of communication strategy for the library, for the LinkedIn library, and I'm always kind of assuming that people are bringing a positive focus with them to their communication efforts, knowing all the communication research says that when we frame things positively, we are more influential with our communication. And then it kind of clicked with me, well, I'm making a pretty big assumption here that people know how to frame positively, that they're thinking positively at any given time. And so that's the reason I got the course developed and put into the course. I'm curious what the impetus was for you, Scott. Why a course on positivity in the face of negative situations, or in the face of negativity? And just what experiences brought you to this point where you wanted to teach this particular course?
Well, it happened, Brenda, and this probably won't surprise you, but when the pandemic had started kicking in, and folks are working from home in many cases for the first time full time, we had a lot of opportunity to stew in our own juices, to live in our own, spend a lot of time with ourselves thinking about what's going on. And I remember a news commentator saying something that I thought was so true of the time, and maybe it still is that, at least in the United States at the time, we were having a hard time even agreeing on what the facts were in the middle of many political upheaval, much political upheaval. And I remember, we're in the middle of a pandemic, then that kind of truth hit me of, we're having a hard time agreeing on facts. Oh, and there's more news about climate change. Oh, and we're hearing more about civil unrest. Oh, and problem after problem. When even me, someone that if I had to answer your Slido in the beginning, I would be at the highest end of positivity that you have. There needs to be another bar above that. That's where I would put myself. When even
I agree.
Right. But when even I was like, man, I'm really starting to feel down. I realized that I bet a lot of people out there are experiencing a world where negativity is creeping in because there's, so many sources of it now.
Yeah.
And I knew in that moment that I had to do something. I've been, a student and a practitioner of positivity for a long, long time. It was in that moment I really started dialing up the research and the work that I put into understanding it, and that's what started what's now staying positive in the face of negativity on LinkedIn Learning.
That's great. Yeah. So the pandemic was really the impetus, and all of the
Yeah.
unrest and the sadness that came through those couple of years. Scott, I'm curious that you said that you've long been a student and a practitioner of positivity, and I certainly, in my intro of you, I neglected to say that maybe your highest credential for this particular LinkedIn Learning course and this live conversation is that you walk your talk on this. I am so amazed at how positive you've always been in any of our interactions. I've never heard you, just you find the silver lining and just really, really are. So so if we have learners that are thinking, oh, well, Scott and Brenda were just born positive. Do you think that that's true, that people are either born positive or negative, or you said you're a student and a practitioner, almost as if this is something learned? Which do you think it is? Inborn, learned, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, I personally think it's a little bit of both, but leaning more towards learned. And depending on maybe you've come across some of the same sources that I have, but depending on which source you believe, most positivity scientists would say that we're actually not born innately positive minded at all, that right from the beginning we get into we're overformed by negative impressions around us, and it's through strong signals like positive minded parents that we grab onto it like a life raft. It can move ourselves forward. So we're actually more inclined to not be positive than the opposite. So I really do believe it, and I bet you do too, because you also have a wonderful course on this topic, that it's something that can be learned and trained with practice. It doesn't always come easy, and there's no guarantees on that, right? But with practice and making it habitual, I think you can become more positive minded over time.
That's great. I totally agree. And not only do we sort of, maybe most of us are more born into a focus on the negative, that negatives tend to weigh more heavily. If two things happen in your day, a good and a bad, it's the bad that we kind of wallow in all evening, it seems. Even though they had equal weight, equal time, equal energy in the world, that negative one grabs us.
Simple truth. We are 4 times more likely to remember criticism than we are praise. I know that's true of me. I could have be going through a keynote and feel like I really nailed it, and then 50 people could be lining up after the keynote, say, "Oh, will you sign my book? Well, hey, what a great job you did, Scott. Blah 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 blah. You changed my life." And then that one person will say, "Yeah, but you moved to the left of the stage too much. You should have moved more to the right." That's what I'll focus on.
It's so true. But I think it's really interesting that, okay, so there's research that we're 4 times more likely to remember the criticism. And then if we reverse that, we have the research by, like, for example, John Gottman, the marriage counselor, who talks about that if we, an indicator of a positive relationship is one where we give 4 times as much positive as we do, or even 5 to 1 positive to critical kinds of feedback. And every relationship, professional or personal, needs some critical feedback. But are we maintaining that 4 to 1 ratio? And then that makes so much sense, because if the mind is remembering the criticism 4 times as more often, then we're really just coming out even in what we remember.
That's right. That's right. It's all a struggle for the median line here. Yeah, right.
That's right.
That's right.
I love it. In your book, you talk about big picture, small step. Big picture, small step. Tell our listeners about that, and what that means for you, and how that helps keep that positivity in the face of negative
Yeah, and
times.
it's really I've even had clients that actually, believe it or not, have tattooed on their wrist "big picture, small step" to remember the simple thing that it's so easy to spiral down into a world of negativity because our thing becomes everything, and we lose context and the scope of how our thing fits into the broader picture of things, and our thing that we're really struggling with, while it may be everything to us and all encompassing and overwhelming at that moment in time, when you could step back and say, okay, but I need to remember the bigger picture here. I need to remember all the things I still have in my life to be thankful for. I need to remember how the thing that's getting me down really, really fits in the context of all the things to be happy and positive about in the greater world. When you can remember that big picture, then it's about taking the first small step towards that bigger picture. This is where you can initiate what's known as the Zeigarnik effect. It's based on researcher Bluma Zeigarnik, who discovered that once we start a task, we're infinitely more likely to complete the task once we have actually started it. This is why a long time ago, you remember the days, Brenda, when if you wanted to watch a television show and find out how it was going to conclude, you had to wait till next season.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
You couldn't stream it within like the next 10 seconds.
Right, there was no binge watching in the day.
There was no binge watching. This is why network executives back in the day always insisted that every episode would end with a cliffhanger, because the brain, once it's engaged in the story, needs to see how it's finished. And it's the same thing with us. When you can think big picture of, okay, this thing stinks. In the big picture, though, to get to a small step to move towards the big picture that I'm yearning for, I'm going to take this one small step. And when you start doing that one first small incremental step towards the big picture you really want and you're aiming for, it can really help you to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. I know we have a lot of people listening who are job transitioning. They're either not working, but actively searching, or they're working but not happy and thinking about a transition. I'm curious, what would big picture small step look like maybe for one of our job transition folks?
Yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up. I'll give you a perfect study. I just talked to someone not even a week ago about this exact thing, that they were captured in their own small world of. They actually were in finance, right? And they wanted to transfer into HR, human resources.
Oh, wow.
And they had come to this conclusion that they were a failure because they weren't built for the finance function. They weren't getting good reviews. And I had to work with her to just step back and say, okay, what's the big picture that you're trying to accomplish here? Well, the big picture is that she wanted to change jobs, change roles, change positions, get to the work that made her heart sing, that made her soul sing. And once she understood, okay, the big picture is that I still have a home, I still have a meal on the table, my kids still love me, I'm still a great manager of others, I can get past that first step, the scary first step, and actually make the move towards transferring into human resources, that small step. She was able to do that. So especially for people that want to change functions, change roles, the big picture is to remember life's too short.
Yeah.
You got to pursue what it is you want to do. And it's often that one small step that starts you, which is saying out loud or saying to your boss, I want to be able to transfer. So it really does apply in that case.
Right. I think sometimes the small step for me is even smaller. It's saying it out loud to a friend, not even to my boss at first. It's allowing myself to even talk to someone in HR to say, what does an HR role look like? You know, my baby step might be an infinitesimal baby step.
Speaking into truth, right?
Yeah, exactly. Big picture, small step. I love that idea. That's going to be helpful, I think, for a lot of us. You also talk about surrounding yourself with positive-minded people, and you have a ton of really interesting research from Boston University, Jim Rohn quotes. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that idea of surrounding ourselves with positive-minded people. What's the research say, and how do you do it?
Yeah, let's start with the science, and then we'll talk the common sense. There is it's now in excess of 70-year-long study at Boston University that they keep looking at thousands and thousands of people that they have in a pool that they're studying. And the conclusion of this study is that the single biggest thing that you can do to create happiness and positivity in your life is to surround yourself with people who are also happy and positive minded. I feel that, author Jim Rohn nailed it when he simply said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And it's so true when you think about it.
It is.
It's why
think, so, it's amazing when you think about if we had just surveyed the audience first, what propels happiness. I could have imagined people saying, making a little more money, having a job that you love, being in good relationships, good health. And that's not it. I mean, all of those probably are factors in the equation, but to hear you say it's surround myself with positive people, interesting.
And that includes the difficult part, Brenda. We can all spend more time and be drawn to positive people in our life, but that means there has to be subtraction. That means that you also have to get rid of toxic people in your life, which is a far more difficult thing to do. And you know what, we'll talk later on today in this session today. I was going to give some thoughts about how to deal with complainers and people in your life that you can't get rid of because they're family or they're coworkers, and that's
They're
real.
coworkers in a job that I don't want to leave. I love this job. I don't want to leave.
That's right. And you know, we'll talk that, but I first just want to pause for a second because it's a really important thing. I would posit to you, Brenda, to the audience today, that we all have had, will have, or in the past have had, and maybe even right now, at least that one personality that we know in our heart of hearts is not bringing positivity to our lives, whoever that might be. And we know that you have a choice to make where you can dial back the amount of time we spend with that person, or at a minimum, minimize the amount of impact we're going to let that person have on our lives. And it really starts with kind of an inventory of who am I spending my time with, and surrounding yourself with those positive people. The common sense is it just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You can't help but feel uplifted and happy when you're with happy people. You can't help feel downtrodden when we're with a bunch of negative people.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like beating your head against the wall, even if you're there with your own positive outlook on life. And I guess that's one of the things we really should have led with this. Now that I think about it, I want to make sure folks online with us aren't thinking about positivity as this sort of rose-colored glasses where you ignore
Right.
problems, or you're living in a distorted reality. You're ignoring that real issues are arising. I want to make sure that you all understand that is not what Scott and I mean when we talk about positivity. You've probably even heard people banter the word toxic positivity around. And I think I'm not even sure I agree that that's a term, because that it's warped positivity. It's not real positivity, that toxic positivity that people are talking about. That's more the kind where you're pretending that life's not throwing you some lemons, because sometimes it does. It does. Sometimes life is hard. Sometimes there are real problems that need complex solutions, persistency, problems that we're not going to solve in our lifetime, but that we can chip away at if we have some persistency to us, some resilience about them. So please don't misunderstand us that we think you should just feel happy all the time. Happiness is not even the same thing as positivity. Happiness is an emotion. Positivity is a mindset. It's something that is a choice. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I put that out there. Scott, any other thoughts on how to kind of define positivity the way we talk about it?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really important point, Brenda. In fact, I would even argue that the psyche requires you to not always be in a positive mindset so that you can more appreciate the moments of positivity when they happen, so that the highs can be even higher. And you can, it's about managing the lows, because the lows are going to come, right? It doesn't matter how positive minded you are, the lows are going to come. It's about making the choice in that moment to really, how am I going to find the agreeable adversity in all of this? How am I going to lift myself out of that? How am I going to draw appreciation of the times when I'm in a positive mood relative to the times when I wasn't? So you almost need the opposite of positivity every once in a while to fuel kind of a more constant positive mindset.
To see that contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listeners, Shelby is our producer backstage. You can't see her, but she did just comment that she can see if you make comments in the live, she will post them over here where Scott and I can see them. So please, if you've got questions, go ahead and type those into the chat, and it'll be a little delayed, but they will get to us where Scott and I can see them. And so Shelby, you're just going to drop them into private chat, I assume, and we'll be able to see that. That is awesome, so that we can keep talking with you. We love your questions. We love to hear what you're feeling about the topic, what your situations are that have brought you to this conversation today. So, all right, let's talk about bother boundaries. I did not know this term. I love that language, bother boundaries. Tell us about it, Scott.
I use them all the time. It's a simple tactic for trying to, be more positive minded. Bother boundaries are simply clear lines that you draw in the sand on what you will worry about and what you won't worry about. And some people are surprised at that. They're like, well, wait a minute, Scott, if I want to be positive, I shouldn't be worrying about anything. Okay, that's just not realistic. We can't even control our brain waves that way. It's about creating lanes. What will I worry about? What won't I worry about? What makes the cut in the will worry about is what are things that you can control? If you can't control it, you shouldn't be worrying about it. So, for example, you're worried about that presentation next Thursday. It's in front of your boss and your boss's boss, and you don't feel prepared. Okay, that's probably a good thing. You're a little bit worried because that's going to trigger you into the right activities, which is working hard on the presentation, refining it, practicing it, so you're more comfortable with it. That's worth worrying about. But then you could do something about that worry. The other things like, well, I wonder how my boss is going to perceive me after the presentation. You can't do anything about that, so why worry about that?
Yeah.
And I find when you can draw clear lines in the sand, Brenda, it forces you to say, well, wait a minute, hold on. That's in the lane that says I can't do anything about it. I can't control it, so I'm actually not going to worry about it. And it's a very simple but powerful tool I use all the time.
Bother boundaries. I love that. Yeah. And there other people's responses are not something that I control. So that should never be in my I do when I'm preparing to have a conversation with someone or to do a presentation. I do think about what are their possible reactions to this topic, to this pitch that I'm making, to this recommendation. Are they going to be on board? Because that helps me focus that I'll just give them next steps, or are they going to be hostile, in which case I need to just kind of back up and plant some seeds and overcome some objections. I think that thinking about that kind of response is helpful. But yeah, beyond that, are they going to say yes or no? Are they going to like me or not like me? I don't know. It's not in my control, so not in my bother boundary. I will not be bothered. I love that. Yeah, that's
Right.
great.
Well said.
When you wrote the course and said staying positive in the face of negativity, what were some of the negative situations you had in mind? What is the negativity? I know you talked about the pandemic and that kind of thing, but um, what are some of the specific situations, including negative self-talk, uh, that kind of haunt the people you've worked with and that you were thinking about when you wrote your tactics for the course?
One of the biggest drivers of the course was this phenomenon of negative self-talk. And just to put that into context, Brenda, for you and the listeners on the impact of negative self-talk. If I may, I'll tell you a very quick story. I interviewed a hypnotherapist, a pretty skilled hypnotherapist, to help me understand, why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Why do we keep beating ourselves up with our negative thoughts, our negative beliefs, our negative attitudes? Even when we catch ourselves doing it sometimes, we still can't stop anyways. It's almost like we can't stop giving away our power fast enough. So why do we keep doing it? And what the hypnotherapist told me, it was absolutely fascinating. She sees hundreds of patients a year for just about anything you can think of. She sees people, they can't stop overeating. They can't stop over drinking. They can't stop cheating on their spouse. They're depressed. They didn't get a promotion they wanted. Across all the people she sees, this blew my mind. Regardless of the problem, regardless of the ailment, regardless of the person, they all have the same root cause to their issue, which is this debilitating belief, I'm not good enough.
Oh.
And that, I've been there. I have been there. I have been there in the corporate world many times. And this thing about this I'm not good enoughness crisis that's hit the workplaces, all too often it's born out of a slight or a misperception of something someone says, and then we spew our I'm not good enoughness onto someone else at work, and then they spew it right back, and we all circle down in this disempowering death spin, and that's exacerbated further by when we make irrelevant comparisons to others that make us feel I'm not good enough even more. And then that's further exacerbated when we think about our differences versus others in general, which all too often is we believe our differences make us lesser than, when in truth, they make us greater than. So I would love for your listeners to believe that they are enough and that they don't have to take on everything by themselves. I would like to repeat that. I'm talking to you, listener at home. You are enough, and you don't have to take on everything by yourself. Negative self-talk is at the core of so much negativity that comes into our lives.
This idea of I am enough versus lesser than, I'm not enough has been such a pervasive theme in so many of my LinkedIn lives. Even when we weren't talking about positivity. Todd DeWitt was here last month, and we were talking about fears and that haunt us in the workplace and how we address those fears or learn to dance with the monster of fear. And there it was, like the number one fear was this: I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm just not enough. And I had Nicole Williams on a couple of months ago, and she talked about imposter experience, which again, the whole underlying premise of imposter syndrome or experience is I'm not enough. I'm not really good enough to be here. I'm just faking it until I get caught. And so that has such an impact then on our on everything, but certainly on our ability to maintain a more positively framed mental space. How can I do that if the underlying foundation is I'm not enough? Yeah.
It's a very difficult thing to cycle yourself out of until, you start to put some tactics in play. And in fact, I'd like to share one with your audience that I think can help. So if they're at home wondering like, whoa, wait a minute, he's talking to me. I do this to myself all the time. I beat myself up. I'd encourage them to try what I call the 90-10 rule. It's a really powerful, simple formula. It's a ratio, if you will, for how I would encourage everyone out there to value themselves, which is to say, how you value yourself should be based 90% on self-worth, 10% on assigned worth. 90% on self-worth, self-appreciation, self-love, self-respect. 10% on assigned worth, that external slice of validation that we all need every now and then that tells us that we're valued and valuable, that we're worthy and worthwhile, that we're doing okay. And what's interesting, Brenda, is that, and then I want to get your reaction to that. Sometimes people will say to me, well, dude, shouldn't you be teaching the 100-0 rule to combat negative self-talk? Like 100% of the time, you should only value yourself based on what you think and never on what others think. I think that's a nice theory. I just think in reality, it doesn't work. We all need that 10% occasional slice of external validation to tell us that we're doing okay. The problem arises when in our formula, that 10% rises to 70, 80, 100%. The problem arises when 100% of how we value ourselves is based on what others think of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we start to chase approval instead of authenticity, when we focus on winning love instead of giving love. So I think the 90-10 rule could be a real powerful tool for your listeners. I'm curious to see what if that resonates.
So many things come to mind. First of all, I want to circle. Don't let me forget to come back to chasing approval, not authenticity. Let's come back to that in a minute. But absolutely, the 90-10 internal to external validation rule. I love it. It brings to mind Brene Brown's commentary one time that I heard her speaking at a Talent Connect conference, and she said the people whose opinion of you should matter to you, they should fit on a Post-it note, like a little Post-it note, not a big flip chart size Post-it that goes on the wall, but a little Post-it note. And I think that was her language around 90-10, that most of my opinion of myself needs to come from right here. Now, I do want to ask about that. What if my own opinion of myself is not very validating? Then that 90% is sort of reinforcing a negative piece that we got to talk about that a little bit. But I think that I do agree with you that 10, I don't like a 100-0. I like the 90-10. And here's why for me. One, like you said, it's just kind of maybe more realistic to assume that at least 10% will be external. But also, I've been given external feedback sometimes about things I can't see in myself. Your own talents are almost hard to see because like a fish in the water, you don't even realize. I think it's hard to see talent because one of the criteria or one of the indicators of talent is it comes easily to me.
Yeah.
So I assume this is just something easy, not that I'm good at it. And then someone else comes along and goes, oh, no, that is not easy. so it's talent, and that has been eye-opening for me. And then I can kind of lean into that strength or develop that talent a little bit more. So I do want the 10%. I need to challenge myself to make sure I'm keeping my self-worth at that 90-10, and that most of it's coming from in here.
Yeah, that's well said, Brenda. And to your point, well, wait a minute, Scott, that makes sense. But what if that 90% is not good? If I don't value myself highly? And, I think an important thing for folks to keep in mind is that can exacerbate if you keep beating yourself up with negative self-talk. For every time you take a step forward and feel good about yourself, something goes wrong and you beat yourself up and go backwards. So you have to get better at catching yourself in the moment when you're beating yourself up. Not beating yourself up for beating yourself up, but just notice that I'm doing it again. And I still have to work on this. I'm doing it again. I'm talking negative about myself. I'm creating this aura of I'm not worth much. And in that moment, and I don't own this tip, this is classic psychology. It's really important in that moment when you realize you're doing that to yourself, to talk to yourself like you would a friend in need.
Mm-hmm.
If a friend came up to you clearly looking, Brenda, would you do this? If I came up to you looking for empathy, clearly, right? And I said, "Oh, Brenda, I just did a LinkedIn Live, and man, I blew it. Some folks chimed in with questions. I didn't have the answers. I just didn't feel good, and I'm clearly looking for empathy. Would you interrupt me after 5 minutes and then say, okay, Scott, I heard you. I've come to a conclusion. You're a complete loser." I don't think you would do that to me.
You're really not very good at this. Don't do it anymore. Find a new job. Right? No, of course not. We would never do that to a friend. Never.
So why would you do it to yourself? So why would you do it to yourself then? So it's just important that the 90-10 rule works when the 90% is something that you're working hard to bring to a positive state. Yeah. So it's a very great point that you bring up.
Well, and I love the, circling clear back to some of our opening thoughts about that 3-to-1 ratio, 3 positive comments to every 1 critical comment. Am I using that ratio on myself? I was talking about it in terms of colleagues and team members and relationships, but am I doing it for myself too?
I think that's a really smart application of it. I'm going to start using that. I like it. I like it.
I love it. All right. So let's see. We have Teresa's asked, in a season of layoffs, how do you keep that 90% when you can't control executive decisions? So thank you, Teresa. Great example for us to play with. So, Scott was being real clear about let's put our boundaries on our boundaries on what we can control. And she's saying, okay, I'm not controlling the executive decisions. I didn't get to have a say in downsizing or reorganizing or who's going to get laid off. How do I maintain 90% when we've got rampant layoffs happening and reorganization? Great, Teresa. Thank you.
Yeah, that's where, and those are always difficult ones because, Brenda, you and I as positivity practitioners, we don't want to come across as Pollyanna, right?
Right.
We don't want to come across as, well, okay, just need to look past that. Like, that is a harsh reality. Layoffs are happening. Maybe this person is asking the question, it sounds like maybe they have been laid off. And I don't want to downplay any of that.
Right.
I do want to go back to big picture, small step, to where I think in those kinds of scenarios, that is a pretty terrible thing that has happened. And it is all encompassing and it's hard and you need to let it be for a small amount of time.
Yeah.
Being positive is not about being unrealistic. You need to understand that this really stinks. At some point, though, you have to step back to the bigger picture that I'm hopeful the person that asked this question still has their health. Maybe they have loved ones in their life that really matter. Maybe they have the wherewithal to get another job in another industry relatively soon. Whatever that reframing, reinforcing bigger picture is, it's important as soon as you can to move to the bigger picture outside of the reality right now that really, really stinks.
Yeah.
And then start taking those micro steps towards that, whether they're, like you were saying, as simple as saying out loud, I need to find another job, all the way to starting to put your resume together for the first time in 20 years, whatever that might be, right? Would you agree with that, Brenda?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I even have a section of the video, my being positive in the workplace, Teresa, that I hope you'll watch. The one video is about, well, what do you do when life really is hard? And because sometimes I start with these two characters who are living almost parallel lives, but one of them sees the glass is half empty and the other one's seeing it as glass half full. But sometimes you're not living a parallel life. You're living a wretched world for a minute. And I say, you got to let yourself grieve. You got to let yourself feel those feelings for a bit. Absolutely. And then to Scott's point, the micro steps, I think part of that is this recognition of very intentional effort to focus on other things that create positivity in people. So that's the interesting thing about the research for me, is that positivity is not necessarily shaped by how easy or how hard your life is. Some of the most positive people I know are those who've had some of the most extremely challenging lives. So it's not, hey, life was easy or life was hard, and therefore I'm positive or not. It's people that tap into meaning, relationship, and kind of making a significant having engagement with people. So it's easy to want to isolate during those times, but engagement with others is a form of positivity, especially if we're surrounding ourselves with positive people, like what Scott's research was telling us about. And finding meaning in even the hard things. What's the meaning? What's the lesson? What am I learning? What comes out of this? I think putting our focus on that, even when we're in a bad moment in life, is helpful.
Well said. Very well said.
I hope that helps, Teresa. That is a tough one and a really good example. Thanks for sharing it with us. Karen's asking, would you say that it might still be helpful to think ahead about others' reactions in terms of strategies to follow if they react negatively, but not dwelling on it? Yes, absolutely. That's that anticipation of, okay, I think if I recommend this, they're going to say that. That's part of good influence. So absolutely, but not maybe worrying so much about, yes, did they like the color of my dress? Did they worry, did they think more about the idea, I guess. How are they reacting to my ideas, to my recommendation? Because that I guess it's back to the control piece that Scott was talking about. I can control how we overcome obstacles to implementing this idea that I'm trying to get people to buy into. I don't really have a lot of control over whether you think of me this way or that way. And so I'm just not going to lose sleep over that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that little, going back to the bother boundaries, do you want to be worried about how you're going to come across in that presentation? To the extent you can control how you think you're going to come across, how people interpret that data and what they get thereafter, you can't control. So it's just about being finer and drawing the lines, within the context of that upcoming presentation on what you can control and what you can't.
I wanted to have a follow-up about chasing.
Oh, approval instead of authenticity.
Yeah. Tell me more about that, because I know authenticity is almost a buzzword, but it's also real. I mean, I think I love that workplace professionals are starting to think more and more seriously about authenticity in the workplace. So what does it mean to chase authenticity rather than approval, or approval rather than authenticity to you?
One of the things I used to coach younger managers on in my corporate days, maybe more than anything else, first of all, would be to stop the comparing to other people. It's absolute toxic to the 10th degree. The only comparison that matters is to who you were yesterday and whether or not you're becoming a better version of yourself. Close second would be people that found themselves chasing approval. The reason they would draw happiness is when their boss would approve of them and show them that, oh yes, okay, you are now in the inner circle. I really like you, and who you are. And what happens is in that journey of trying to get approval, it's an insatiable beast. What gets you approval will change over time. You're always feeding that beast until at one point you start to become a version of someone that you're not. You start to change who you are in the pursuit of that insatiable beast called approval. On the other side, though, if you instead focus on authenticity, staying true to yourself, being realistic about what's required to succeed in your environment, what's important to your boss, without being ridiculous about it, without losing sight of who you are, stay true to what makes you happy, how you come across, what is important to you in your life. Stay authentic. And then you can kind of put approval in its own lane. More often than not, you'll get approval from others because you're being true to yourself. That's what I mean by that statement.
Oh, I love that. Well, and people can sniff out inauthenticity in a
Oh,
heartbeat. So if you're chasing approval, it's almost harder to get it because people don't approve of approval chasing. So
that's right.
they like it when you want to do what they want you to do. But I also think it was interesting. You said, it's good to know what your boss wants within reason. Don't be ridiculous about it. But yeah, I can kind of understand what my chair's goals are, and I can still get to those goals.
Right.
Assuming that I find these goals worthy, otherwise maybe I'm not working in the right spot, but assuming I'm aligned with, okay, this is a worthy goal, I can get there a million different ways. I need the path I need to choose needs to be the one that's most authentic to me, that is most Brenda.
And that's a pretty good Brenda to chase.
All right, let's talk about the burn the boat metaphor. This was, I love this metaphor. I think it's so powerful. I had never heard it, and I didn't even know the Trojan story behind it. So tell us the story. Tell us what this means to you, or an example of your own life of burning the boat.
This really works, folks. I can promise you. It's a way to kind of reframe. If you're afraid of failing, if you're afraid of bad things that can happen, of taking a chance, you have to do what is called burning the boat. Here's what that means. When sea-bound Greek armies would land on an enemy shore, before they would engage in battle, the first thing that they would do is burn their boat to the ground. Not only would that send a message that's incredibly intimidating, but it says you cannot turn back at that point. You land on the shores of your enemy. You burn your way home to the ground. There's no way forward but through now. And that's what Greek sea-bound armies used to do, to send a message to the enemy, but also to themselves, that we are going to be victorious. We'll rebuild the ships after that. We'll do whatever we have to do, but we're not going to give ourselves an excuse to go backwards. We're taking the first step. We're burning the boats. You could apply this to your everyday life. Let me give you an example of how I did. For many years, Brenda, when I was in the corporate world, I was planning to leave, to do this, to broaden my platform for making a difference with the spoken and the written word. And I had been planning, but I wasn't pulling the trigger. Because if I'm really honest with myself in retrospect, I was still really afraid of failure in some form. That I knew success at Procter & Gamble, and I had opportunities to go to the next level with even more success at Procter & Gamble. Was I really going to say no to all that and take that death-defying step out on my own, where I could risk failure and not have anything after that in my mind? So I burned the boat, which is, one day I just said, enough of this. I know I want to do this. I know I don't want to, stick around for the next promotion here at Procter & Gamble. I burned the boat. I walked right into my boss's office that morning, and right before I opened the door and went in, I said, "Scott, burn the boat. Don't back off." I went in and said, "I'm leaving.
Oh, wow.
You don't have to worry about getting me in line for the next promotion. This is what I want to do." And here's the magic of that. When you burn the boat, fear of failure disappears when you realize you can't hide behind it anymore. Now I've stepped forward and I've said, I'm doing this thing. There's no more excuses now. Now I got to move forward. I burned the boat. So you could do it too in your own way, just by saying it out loud to a friend that you're going to try this thing you haven't tried yet. Whatever that step is for you that says there's no going back now, you stop hiding behind that fear of failure anymore, because now it can't protect you, because now you've taken that first step.
At first, when I read about this or listened to it in your course, I was thinking it seems in contrast almost, or contradictory to small step. But then I realized, oh, no, not necessarily, because one of my burn the boat strategies is actually a small step burns, but it also burns the boat. And that is when I'm thinking about an initiative, but I'm all tangled up with, well, but do I have the talent to do it? Do I have the time to do it? Am I going to seem like I think too much of myself to put myself out for this initiative or this project? And so what I'll do is send an email to the decision maker. I'm
Yep.
thinking about this. What do you think? And it's like the boat is burned. If someone says, "Yeah, this is a good idea. You should run with it." Yeah, I sent the email. I can't then say, "No, no, no, I was just teasing. I didn't really want to do this. I burned the boat." But it's as simple. I don't quit my job. I send an email. So it seems like a small step, and yet it burns the boat because I can't just keep thinking about it after I launch. Even my boat is, my boat is an email sometimes, but that gets it out into the world. And once I've spoken it to someone, whoo, yeah, I'm committed.
Even the Greek armies had to take a small step before they literally burned the boat. They had to spread pitch on the decks so that it would catch fire quickly enough and burn. So they didn't just, set it. So burning the boat can absolutely be your own version of a small step, as simple as saying it out loud, as simple as sending an email. Whatever symbolically says to you, I'm committed now, that can be burning the boat.
Well, and don't you find that so often, once you take that small step, the fear that was looming in your head is
Yes.
not near it just doesn't have the power anymore. It kind of grows from this huge monster down to this little tiny fuzzy worry,
Yeah, yeah. I call it the this ain't so bad phenomenon.
Yes.
It happens all the time. You try it and you're like, "What was I so afraid of? What was I so
What was
worried
I so
about?
worried
This isn't
about?
that big. That isn't that big of a deal." With the exception being a roller coaster. My daughter got me on a roller coaster, and then like 10 seconds into it, I'm like, "Oh, this is every bit as bad as I thought."
This is worse. This is
This
worse
is
than
worse.
I ever thought it was going to be. I love it. Talk to us about some daily habits and
Yeah.
routines, including maybe the morning routine. I have been keeping a positivity gratitude journal
Oh, yeah.
for decades, and that's one of my daily routines. Is that every evening to sit down and write down 5 things that day for which I am grateful. And I think there is something to gratitude begets more gratitude, because when I open it, I, sometimes will flip back to last year and see what was I writing about on June 19th last year. Oh, I was writing that so and so is feeling better. Oh, yeah, I'm so glad that they have good health now, or things like that. So that's one of my little routines. What are some that you practice or love or recommend to others?
Yeah, you bet. I'll give you a very quick morning routine and then a kind of a daily routine, if
Right.
that would be of use. Um, Probably not surprising. We know from research that if you could start your day off in a positive mindset, this isn't shocking, right? You're 80% more likely to be able to carry that positive spirit throughout the day. So the way you start the day is really important. And I always encourage people to start the day with, remembering three things: goals, affirmations, and sparks that you can add. Wake up in the morning, remember, what are my micro goals for the day? What are my macro goals? The big thing, the one or two big things I'm trying to accomplish, what are the small steps I can take to get there? Just to organize your mind and to not get sucked into a world of emails that might just be thrown at you right from the get-go, right? Simple affirmations. They really, really work as long as they're specific. Waking up in the morning and saying, looking in the mirror and say, I can do anything, isn't helpful. It's not specific. It's not addressing any particular problem. When you wake up in the morning, if you've been kind of struggling with just having a bad attitude every once in a while, saying something like, life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it, that's a different affirmation. I use that one all the time. Very specific, going after a certain thing that's important to you. So affirmations can help as long as they're specific enough to address a thing that tends to get you down. And then
Okay.
also just putting a few sparks in your day, making sure, like, you know what, this morning I'm going to make sure I exercise a little
Yeah.
bit later on. I'm going to plan to meditate. I'm going to plan to take a walk in nature. Nature shows or research shows a 20-minute walk in nature can have a profound impact on the happiness throughout our day. So setting your goals, having some affirmations that are useful to you in the morning, and what sparks am I going to do to spark positivity throughout the day, and plan for that. To
Yeah.
habitualize it in the morning is really, really important. Before I tell you my daily habit, do those make sense, Brenda?
Those make total sense. I love that. I like the sparks. I will feel more joy just knowing that I'm going to plan sparks.
Yeah, it really does work. From a daily habit, one of my favorite things to do, I want to build on what you said. I like to practice what I call grindfulness. It's a combination of gratitude and mindfulness. And, with gratitude, sometimes, we have to keep a journal for a reason, right, Brenda? Because we forget. there's a lot of things in life to be thankful for. You got to make that a habit. On a mindfulness standpoint, that's a lot about awareness. Sometimes, we can be too passive. Yes, I'm very aware of how I'm feeling in the moment. We don't do enough about it. So I like to combine the two, uh, the gratitude and mindfulness into what I call grindfulness, which is finding joy in the daily moments, in the daily grind of life. It forces you to habitualize being positive minded. For example, you're driving to work in the morning and the sunlight dapples off your car, and that sunlight draws to your eye on the side of the road a beautiful peach tree you see blossoming, and you're like, wow, what an incredible, beautiful thing for me to pass on the way to work. You just start to find beauty in the small moments. I just did it the other day, Brett. I was in a sour mood and I hit an email to a friend, and I stopped and I thought, how is it that I'm able to hit a button on my laptop and this thing that I needed to say goes through the ether and gets to my friend in like 8 seconds? What a world we live in. Just finding joy in the small things of life. I call it grindfulness, and it's one of my favorite tricks.
I love that term, grindfulness. Getting through the grind, but with grindfulness. And I think when we have that sort of a practice, we can also think about this idea that all day long, if I know at the end of the day I'm going to be reflecting to another person or in my journal these 5 things, then I'm looking for them all day long, and
Right.
because I gotta check in, I gotta report in, so I gotta be on it here in some ways.
You got to keep yourself honest.
I know this might be asking you, like, do you have a favorite client or a favorite customer or a favorite kid? But do you have a favorite strategy? I love your grindfulness. Is that your favorite?
I use grindfulness probably at least a couple of times a week. I use that one a lot. I really do burn the boat a lot. I take that step when I'm maybe worried about something that just do it, man. Just tear the band-aid off, burn the boat. I do that a lot, and I also just try to. I really try to draw from the past, and a lot of times negativity comes from we catastrophize situations that aren't really as bad as we think that they are. And I remember from the past when I've been in similar situations to just remind myself of, what, if I'm really honest, I've been through something like this before and I emerged okay. It was painful in the moment for sure. I learned some things I wish didn't happen, but I ended up okay in the past. So I also draw from the past a lot to really keep negative events in proper scale.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. I think you and I could chat for hours about this, but I see that we're at the top of the hour, so I want to wrap up for our learners that have other things to get to. I've mentioned that we both have courses in the LinkedIn library that you can find by just searching our name. If people need more Scott, what are some other ways they can follow you or think or read? We've got the books. What are some other ways people could get in touch with you and follow up with more needs for keynotes or training or thought leadership from Scott?
Easiest thing, thank you for asking. Easiest thing to do is to just go to scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. And then you'll get information there on all the keynotes, all the trainings, all my courses on LinkedIn Learning, all my books. You can also sign up for my weekly LinkedIn Learning newsletter, my blog called Lead On, which another counterpart of ours, Tatiana, helped me name. It's a weekly newsletter that gives you tips on how to lead yourself in life and also how to act as a leader of others. So scottmautz.com to find out all that good stuff about me.
I love it. And we will be back next month, hopefully with our comments working, so that we can have more chatter with you. But I love that you posted anyway. We got those comments into us, which was great. If I missed any, I will follow up in the live feed, which will live on forever there in my feed. July 17th at 1 p.m., we're going to be talking about listening with Laura Janusik. I thought I was a listening expert, and then I met Laura and thought I have so much more to learn, which is always a great feeling to have. Scott, thank you so much for being here. If surrounding myself, if I'm the average of 5 people that are positive in my life, I'm so glad you're in my world because you're bringing up my average, Scott.
Thank you so much. We do what we can, and thank you for this great show, Learn Plus. It's such a great concept, and the world needs more of this. So thank you for what you do, Brenda.
Take care.